My name is Evelyn Reed, and I'm 68 years old. For 45 years, my world was a small, quiet, and wonderfully predictable place. It revolved around my husband, Arthur, our little house on Elm Street, and the garden he so lovingly tended. Then, in the span of a single week, that world was burned to the ground. And at his funeral, I received a message from beyond the grave. Arthur was a man of quiet habits. He spent his career as an accountant for small businesses in our town of Millfield. He wasn't a high-flying corporate type. He was the man people trusted with their livelihoods, the one who helped the local bakery stay afloat and the hardware store manage its inventory. I was the town librarian until I retired. Our lives were woven from simple threads: morning coffee on the porch, long walks in the evening, and the comfortable silence that only comes from decades of shared love. We never had much money, but we had a richness that money could never buy. We raised two sons, Leo and Nathan. From the very beginning, they were like two sides of the same coin. Leo, the older one, was ambition personified. He had a fire in him, a relentless need to be bigger than our small-town life. He'd look at his father's ledgers and ask, "Dad, why don't you aim higher? Go for the big city clients?" Arthur would just smile and say, "Because these are my neighbors, Leo. My success is seeing them succeed." That answer never satisfied him. Nathan, 2 years younger, spent his life in Leo's shadow, admiring him, emulating him, and following wherever he led. When Leo turned 18, he left for the city with a scholarship and a burning desire to never look back. Nathan, of course, followed him a few years later. They started a tech company together, something to do with financial software. At first, I was bursting with pride. My boys, building a future, chasing big dreams. They seemed to be doing well. They drove expensive cars, wore sharp suits, and lived in sleek, minimalist apartments that looked like they were straight out of a magazine, but with their apparent success came a growing distance. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became obligations, marked on a calendar. When they did come home, it felt like they were visiting a museum exhibit of their past. Leo's wife, Chloe, a social media influencer whose life was a curated collection of expensive brunches and exotic vacations, made no effort to hide her condescension. "Oh, Evelyn, this house is so vintage," she said once, running a manicured finger over my worn, comfortable armchair. "You know, the market is hot. You and Arthur are sitting on a goldmine." Leo would always back her up. "She's right, Mom. This house is a dead asset. You could sell it, move into a luxury condo, and have a nice nest egg. We could even invest it for you. Make your money work for you." "This house holds our memories, Leo," Arthur replied, his voice calm but firm. "It's not an asset, it's our home. And it is not for sale." I saw a flicker of something in Leo's eyes then. Not just disappointment, but a raw, sharp-edged frustration. I chalked it up to his ambitious nature, his desire to see us live better. Now I know it was desperation. The end came with a terrifying speed. One Monday, Arthur was in his garden, wrestling with a stubborn patch of weeds. By Thursday, he was in the hospital. It started with a crippling fatigue, a wave of dizziness that almost made him collapse. Then came the confusion. He, the man who could recall financial data from 20 years ago, couldn't remember my name for a fleeting, terrifying moment. The doctors were baffled. They ran every test imaginable: MRIs, blood panels, spinal taps. They found nothing. No stroke, no tumor, no infection. It was just a catastrophic, system-wide failure with no apparent cause. Leo and Nathan rushed to be by his side, their faces masks of deep concern. They took over completely, speaking with the doctors in hushed tones, managing the flow of information. "Mom, don't you worry about the medical details," Leo said, steering me toward the waiting room. "It's all very technical and stressful. Let us handle it. You just need to rest." Looking back, I see they weren't protecting me. They were isolating me. They were building a wall around Arthur, and I was on the outside. He slipped into a coma on Saturday. On Sunday morning, his heart stopped. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, brought on by complications from a sudden and aggressive neurological condition of unknown origin. My world ended not with a bang, but with the flat, monotonous tone of a heart monitor. The funeral, just 3 days later, was a blur of black clothes and hushed condolences. Leo and Nathan handled all the arrangements with a chilling efficiency, as if they were closing a business deal. They chose the cheapest casket, the shortest service. It all felt so rushed, so impersonal. I stood by the grave, a hollowed-out shell of a woman, clutching a rose. Maria, my neighbor, had her arm around me, but I felt utterly alone. I watched my sons. Leo stood stoic, his jaw tight. Nathan fidgeted, constantly checking his watch. Chloe was standing a little way off, discreetly typing on her phone. Were they grieving? Or were they just waiting for this final inconvenience to be over? As the first handful of dirt hit the polished wood of the casket, the sound echoed in the pit of my stomach. It was so final. In that moment of pure, undiluted despair, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. It was a number I didn't recognize, no name attached. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the world just fade away. But a strange compulsion made me pull it out, my hands trembling so badly I could barely read the screen. The message was 6 words. 6 words that felt like a scream in the silent graveyard. 6 words that changed everything. That's not why I died. Trust no one. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, the words blurring through my tears. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake. A cruel, sick prank sent by some teenager, or a message meant for someone else. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, my mind screaming at me to dismiss it. But the words were branded onto my brain. Trust no one. I looked up at my sons, Leo and Nathan, standing by the grave as if they were closing a business deal. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the little boys I'd raised. I saw 2 strangers wearing my sons' faces. The seed of a terrible, unthinkable doubt had been planted. In the days that followed, that seed began to grow. The house filled with a sympathy I didn't want and food I couldn't eat. Leo and Nathan were a constant presence, buzzing with a strange, frantic energy disguised as concern. "Mom, we should start going through Dad's paperwork," Leo said, not even 2 days after we buried him. He was standing in Arthur's small home office, holding a stack of files. "We need to figure out the estate, probate, all that legal stuff. It's better to get it over with quickly." Chloe, his wife, floated through the rooms, her eyes scanning everything not with sadness, but with appraisal. "Once we get this place cleared out, the staging will be key," she murmured to Leo, thinking I couldn't hear. "Neutral colors, minimalist furniture. It'll photograph beautifully for the listing." The listing. They were already talking about the listing. Arthur's favorite armchair, the scuff marks on the floor where the boys used to race their toy cars. The faint scent of his pipe tobacco that still lingered in the air. To them, it was all just clutter to be optimized. Their concern felt like a performance. Their hugs were hollow, and their words were all about efficiency and financial planning. Not once did they share a fond memory of their father. Not once did I see a genuine tear. At night, alone in the silence of my house, the 6 words from the text message would echo in the dark. "That's not why I died." I replayed Arthur's last week over and over in my mind. He was 70, yes, but he was strong. He had the heart of a man 20 years younger. The doctors had been so confused, so unable to give a name to the illness that had stolen him from me. An aggressive, undiagnosed neurological condition, they'd called it. A vague, empty phrase that meant, "We have no idea." It felt wrong then, and it felt sinister now. The message wasn't a prank. I knew it in my bones. It was a warning. Arthur was the most meticulous man I'd ever known. He planned everything. He had contingency plans for his contingency plans. If he sensed something was wrong, if he felt he was in danger, he wouldn't have just let it happen. He would have left a breadcrumb. A sign. A clue for me to follow. Fueled by a new, desperate energy, I began to search. I started in his office. Leo and Nathan had already ransacked his filing cabinet, pulling out bank statements, insurance policies, and the deed to the house. They were looking for numbers on a page. But they wouldn't have been looking for the heart of the man. They would have overlooked the things that truly mattered. On his desk, next to a stack of neatly organized tax forms, was his old leather-bound journal. It wasn't for finances. It was where he jotted down his thoughts, notes about his garden, quotes from books he'd read. It was the one place he was truly himself. I opened it, my fingers tracing his familiar, steady handwriting. For pages, it was normal. Notes about planting tulips, complaints about the squirrels, a funny thing I'd said at dinner. But then, in the entries from the last few weeks, the tone shifted. An entry from 3 weeks ago, Leo and Nathan came by. More pressure about selling the house. They talk about capital and investments, but their eyes tell a different story. I see a deep, gnawing panic in them. I looked up their company online. All flash, no substance. I fear their success is a house of cards. My blood ran cold. I flipped the page. An entry from 10 days ago. Leo was so insistent today. He brought me this new health supplement, a powder to mix in my coffee. He said it was a high-end vitamin blend for cognitive sharpness. He was so eager for me to try it. I told him I would, but the smell was off, vaguely chemical. I threw it down the sink when he wasn't looking. I'll stick to my usual vitamins. Why is he so desperate for me to take it? My breath hitched in my chest. I felt a wave of nausea. The final entry was dated the day before he was hospitalized. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible, heavy. Feeling so dizzy. My thoughts are like fog. Leo was here this morning. He made the coffee. I watched him. When he thought I wasn't looking, he had this strange expression on his face. Not worry. It was expectation. He was waiting for something. Evie, my love, if you are reading this, check under the floorboard. The one near the desk that always creaked. My grandfather's compass. Be careful. My grandfather's compass. It was a code. A message meant only for me. I dropped the journal and scrambled to the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. The old oak floorboard he'd always promised to fix. I jammed a letter opener into the seam and pried it up. It groaned in protest. Underneath, nestled in the dark, dusty space, was a small velvet pouch. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely open it. Inside was not a compass. It was an old, cheap-looking prepaid phone, a burner phone, and a single, small brass key. A number was stamped onto the key, 317. With trembling fingers, I powered on the phone. The battery was nearly full. I navigated to the sent messages folder. There was only one message in the history. It had been sent at 10:32 a.m., the day of the funeral. The moment they had started lowering his casket. It was the message I had received. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a stranger. It was Arthur. He had sent the message himself. He must have pre-programmed it, a dead man's switch, a final warning sent from a secret phone he had hidden away. He knew. He suspected his own sons. And he had spent his final lucid moments creating a trail for me to follow, to protect me from the very people we had brought into this world. My grief was suddenly eclipsed by a cold, terrifying rage. The key, what did it open? Just as I was staring at the key in my palm, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A car door slammed. It was them. Leo and Nathan. They walked in without knocking, their smiles wide and predatory. Mom, Leo said, his voice dripping with false concern. We were just in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by. We brought a real estate agent with us. He's just going to take a quick look around, get a sense of the place for an appraisal. No time like the present, right? His eyes darted around the room, a quick, dismissive scan, but when they landed on the open journal on the desk, they narrowed for just a fraction of a second. My mind went into overdrive. The heavy weight of the phone in my apron pocket felt like a block of lead. Leo's eyes were fixed on the journal, and for a terrifying second, I thought he could read my mind, that he could see the terrible knowledge I now possessed. I had to act. I had to become the person they already thought I was, a grieving, slightly frail, and utterly clueless old woman. I closed the journal slowly, my hand patting the cover with a feigned tenderness. Oh, hello, boys, I said, my voice watery. You startled me. I was just looking at your father's handwriting. I forced a weak, sorrowful smile. It's silly, I know. I just miss him so much. Leo's sharp gaze softened, replaced by a familiar, condescending pity. Of course, Mom, he said, stepping forward to put a hand on my shoulder. Take all the time you need. This is Mr. Davison. He's just going to have a quick, informal look around. He's the best in the business. Mr. Davison was a man who smelled of expensive cologne and cheap ambition. He walked through my home with the detached air of a surgeon, pointing out what needed to change. Great bones, but the whole place needs a refresh, he said, waving a hand dismissively at my treasured family photos. We'll want to neutralize the color palette, declutter. You know, depersonalize it. Depersonalize my life. That's what they wanted. To erase every trace of us and turn our home into a sterile, sellable box. I nodded meekly, playing the part of a woman overwhelmed by it all. While Mr. Davison was measuring the kitchen, I saw Nathan pull Leo aside in the hallway. Leo, this feels wrong, Nathan whispered, his voice strained. Look at her. She's heartbroken. Maybe we should wait. Leo's response was a low, venomous hiss. Don't you go soft on me now, Nathan. We are doing this for her. She can't manage this big house, and we have responsibilities. Everything is on the line. Remember that. I pretended not to hear, but I filed it away. Nathan was the weak link. He still had a flicker of conscience, buried deep under his brother's influence. Leo, on the other hand, had none. He was a man driven by something far bigger and more dangerous than just ambition. After they finally left, leaving a trail of condescending advice and a profound sense of violation, I locked the door and leaned against it, my body trembling. I pulled the burner phone and the small brass key from my pocket. Key 317. It wasn't a P.O. box. Arthur hated the post office. It wasn't a locker. Then it clicked, a memory from decades ago. Millfield Savings and Loan, the old stone bank downtown. After his father died, Arthur had kept a small safe deposit box there. He called it his rainy day box, a place for important documents that had more sentimental than financial value. Our sons, with their digital accounts and cryptocurrency wallets, wouldn't even think to look in such an old-fashioned place. The next morning, I walked into the bank, the key clutched in my fist. The cool, quiet air of the lobby was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. Mrs. Gable, a kind woman who had started as a teller the same year Arthur and I were married, greeted me from behind the counter. "Evelyn, dear," she said, her eyes full of genuine sympathy. "I was so terribly sorry to hear about Arthur. He was such a good man." "Thank you, Carol," I managed to say. I need to get into his safe deposit box." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Of course. Let me just check the records." She typed on her computer. "Here we are. Box 317. You know, he was just in a few weeks ago." He seemed distracted. Agitated, almost. It wasn't like him at all. My heart hammered. He knew he was running out of time. Carol led me through the imposing steel door of the vault. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and quiet money. She located box 317, used her master key, and then stepped back, leaving me to use mine. The small brass key slid in perfectly. I turned it, the click echoing in the silence. I pulled out the long, metal box and carried it to a small, private viewing room. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. It wasn't what I expected. There were no stock certificates, no secret savings bonds. It was an arsenal. A meticulously organized file prepared by a man who knew he was going to be murdered. On top was a small, sealed plastic baggie containing a few teaspoons of a fine white powder, labeled in Arthur's handwriting, "Vitamin Blend, from Leo. Do not touch." Beneath that was a thick file folder. I opened it. Inside were printouts from what looked like investor websites and financial news blogs. It was all about my son's company. They weren't successful. They were frauds. The documents detailed a history of overpromised results, missed deadlines, and angry investors who were now filing lawsuits. They were millions of dollars in debt. Their entire lavish lifestyle was a lie, funded by borrowed money that was quickly running out. Next, I found an insurance policy. It was our standard life insurance, a modest policy for $100,000 that we'd had for 30 years. But there was a recent amendment, dated just 6 months ago. Arthur had circled a clause in red ink. It was an add-on for an accelerated payout, the full amount to be paid immediately upon a diagnosis of a terminal illness with a prognosis of less than 6 months. They weren't just planning to kill him. They were planning to do it in a way that looked like a fast-acting disease to get the money without delay. The last thing in the box was a single business card. It read, "David Chen. Private investigations. Discretion. Results." On the back, in Arthur's familiar script, was a final note to me, "Evie, my love. David Chen is a good man. Highly recommended by a trusted client. I have not called him. The first contact must come from you. That way, there is no trail leading back to me. If you're reading this, the worst has happened. Trust your instincts. They have never failed you. I love you always." He had done it all. He had gathered the evidence, identified their motive, secured the weapon, and found me an ally. He had laid out the entire path to justice for me, and in his final act of love, he had made sure I was the one to take the first step, to keep me safe. I sat there in the cold, silent vault, the evidence spread out before me. The grief was still a physical weight, a crushing presence in my chest. But now, it was joined by something else. A cold, hard clarity. A sense of profound, unwavering purpose. I was no longer just a grieving widow. I was Arthur Reed's last line of defense. I was the executor of his justice. I packed everything carefully into my purse, walked out of the bank, and sat in my car, the engine off. I took out the business card. My hand was perfectly steady as I dialed the number. A calm, quiet voice answered on the second ring. "David Chen." I took a deep breath, my own voice emerging clear and strong. "Mr. Chen. My name is Evelyn Reed. My husband, Arthur, is dead. He left your card for me. I believe my sons murdered him, and I have the proof." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, so profound I thought I'd been disconnected. Then, David Chen's voice came through, calm and measured. "Mrs. Reed, stay in your car. Lock your doors. Do not go back into the house. I'm in Northwood, about 20 minutes away. Text me the address of a public place near you. A coffee shop, a library. We'll meet there." His composure was a lifeline in my sea of chaos. I met him half an hour later at a small, anonymous coffee shop one town over. He was younger than I'd pictured, maybe in his late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb every detail. He didn't offer condolences or platitudes. He simply listened. I laid out the contents of the safe deposit box on the table between us, the bag of white powder, the damning financial records, the modified insurance policy, and Arthur's final, heartbreaking note. He examined each item with meticulous care. "Your husband was a very smart man, Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "He built a near-perfect case. The financials establish a powerful motive. Your sons weren't just failing, they were about to be exposed as frauds. The insurance policy shows premeditation. And this," he said, tapping the baggie with his pen, "this is the murder weapon. What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Do we go to the police? Not yet, he cautioned. What we have is a mountain of circumstantial evidence. Strong, but a clever lawyer could still create doubt. They could claim Arthur was despondent over their failure and took his own life. They could claim you're a grieving widow who's become paranoid. To make this case airtight, we need one more thing. We need to get them to confess. The thought sent a jolt of pure fear through me. Confess? They'd never. Not directly, maybe, David interrupted gently. But people get sloppy when they think they've won. Their guard is down. We need to create a situation where they feel safe, and we need to record what they say. We need to get them to connect the insurance money to their financial troubles. We need them to talk about Arthur's sudden illness. We need to bait the trap. He explained his plan. I would have to go home and play the part of the defeated mother, finally ready to give in to their demands. I would need to lure them into a conversation, all while wearing a recording device. It was a terrifying prospect. To sit across from my own children, knowing they had poisoned my husband, and lie to their faces. It felt like a betrayal of my entire life as a mother. But then I saw Arthur's face in my mind, his eyes full of love and worry. He had done his part. Now it was time for me to do mine. I'll do it, I said, my resolve hardening. David nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. He handed me a small, elegant silver brooch in the shape of a maple leaf. The microphone is here, he said, pointing to a tiny, almost invisible hole. Just press the side to start and stop recording. Be natural. You're a grieving mother asking questions. That's all. I didn't have to wait long to set the stage. The next afternoon, Leo and Nathan arrived at the house, unannounced as usual. This time, they came bearing documents. Mom, Leo began, his voice oozing with a syrupy compassion that made my skin crawl. He spread a sheaf of papers on the dining room table. We've had our lawyer draw these up. It's a durable power of attorney and a medical directive. It's for your own good. It will allow us to handle all your finances, manage the estate, and make decisions about the house sale. You've been through so much. You shouldn't have to worry about any of it. It was a legal coup. They were trying to strip me of my autonomy, to take control of every asset, to effectively erase me from my own life. It was a move born of pure desperation. And it was the perfect opening. I picked up the papers, my hand trembling for effect. I let my shoulders slump and looked at them with weary, tear-filled eyes. Oh, boys, Isaac? I'm so tired. Tired of the paperwork, tired of this big, empty house. Tired of fighting. I saw it then, a shared glance between them. A flicker of victory. They thought they had finally broken me. Maybe you're right, I continued, letting my voice crack. It's all too much for me now that your father is gone. Before I sign anything, though, can we just have one last family dinner tonight? Here? I'll make that roast chicken your father loved so much. I just want to talk. I want to understand. Understand what? Leo asked, suddenly wary. Everything, I said, looking from him to Nathan. Your business. Your father's health. I feel like I've been in a fog. I need some clarity before I turn my life over to you. It was a hook they couldn't refuse. A final dinner to secure their prize. They agreed immediately. That evening, as I prepared the meal, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't a mother cooking for her sons. I was a hunter setting a trap. I pinned the silver brooch to my sweater, its cold weight a constant reminder of my purpose. I pressed the side. A tiny, almost imperceptible red light blinked once and then went dark. It was active. They arrived with Chloe, who was already talking about the amazing interior designer she'd hired for their next project. During dinner, I let them lead the conversation. They talked about their plans for the money from the house sale, about a new round of funding for their company, about a vacation to the Maldives. They spoke as if I wasn't even there. After the plates were cleared, I folded my hands on the table and looked at them. The power of attorney, I said softly. I'll sign it. But I need to know you'll be okay. Your father, he worried so much. He wanted you to be happy. Nathan, my quiet follower of a son, squirmed in his chair. Leo, however, was as smooth as ever. We're fine, Mom. Business is booming. We just had a few cash flow issues, that's all. Dad just didn't understand the tech world. I turned my gaze to Nathan, keeping it gentle. And your father's illness? It was so fast. The doctors were clueless. It gives me some peace to know that you were there for him at the end, Leo. Bringing him his special coffee, giving him those expensive vitamins you ordered for him. You really did everything you could. I said the words with a mother's loving pride, but they were a carefully aimed accusation. The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe looked confused. Leo's face was a mask of stone. But Nathan broke, his face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Mom, he stammered, his voice choked with guilt. I told him it was wrong. I didn't want to. Shut up, Nathan. Leo's voice was a whipcrack, cold and lethal. He shot his brother a look of pure hatred before turning back to me, his smile a terrifying, plastic thing. What my brother means to say is that we all feel a little guilty. We all wish we could have done more. Dad's death was a tragedy. He paused, his eyes like chips of ice. But in a way, it was a blessing. He was so forward-thinking with that insurance policy. It's going to solve a lot of our temporary cash flow problems. He took care of us, even at the end. My blood froze. He hadn't confessed to the murder. But he had done the next best thing. He had, on a live recording, directly connected Arthur's death to the insurance payout and their desperate need for money. He had forged the final link in the chain of evidence. I slowly pushed the unsigned power of attorney papers back across the table. I think, I said, my voice no longer trembling, that you should all go home now. The look on Leo's face was a mixture of pure fury and utter confusion. My sudden shift from a docile, grieving mother to a woman with a spine of steel had completely thrown him. He opened his mouth to argue, but I just held up a hand. The conversation is over. Please leave my house. For once in his life, he was speechless. He grabbed a stunned Nathan by the arm and practically dragged him out the door. The moment their car sped away, the strength that had been holding me up vanished. I sank into a chair, my body trembling with the aftershock. I reached up and pressed the side of the silver brooch. The recording was safe. I had done it. But the victory felt like ashes in my mouth. My family was truly and irrevocably gone. The next morning, I met David Chen in the same quiet coffee shop. We sat in a corner booth, and I slid the brooch across the table. He produced a small laptop and a cable, and within moments, the conversation from the night before was playing through a set of earbuds he handed me. I watched his face as he listened. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened when he heard Leo connect the insurance money to their financial troubles. When Nathan's choked, partial confession came through, he paused the recording. It's more than enough, he said, his voice firm. Nathan's breakdown and Leo's immediate silencing of him is a clear sign of conspiracy. Leo's statement about the insurance solving their cash flow problems is the nail in the coffin. It locks in the motive. We're ready, Evelyn. It's time to go to the police. An hour later, we were sitting in the sterile, quiet office of Detective Miller at the Millfield Police Department. He was a veteran cop with tired eyes who had seen it all, and his initial skepticism was palpable. He listened patiently as I recounted the story, his face unreadable. But as David began laying out the evidence, Arthur's journal, the financial records showing millions in debt, the insurance policy, the bag of white powder, and finally, the audio recording, the detective's posture changed. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed in intense focus. He listened to the recording twice, his expression hardening into a grim mask. When it was over, he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not a skeptical police officer, but a man profoundly shaken. Mrs. Reed, he said, his voice low and heavy. In 30 years on the force, I've seen some terrible things. This is a new low. He immediately got the district attorney on the phone. Within 2 hours, they had secured warrants for the arrest of Leo and Nathan Reed on suspicion of murder and for a full search of their homes and offices. That evening, I sat in my silent house, waiting. The police had asked me to stay put. Around 7 o'clock, a car pulled into my driveway. It was my son's. They stormed up to the door, their faces tight with anger. They thought they were coming back to intimidate the confused old woman from last night. Mom, we're not playing games anymore, Leo said, his voice sharp as he stepped inside. You are going to sign those papers tonight. We're done talking. It was then that 2 police cars, lights off, silently rolled up and blocked the driveway. Detective Miller and 3 other officers stepped out. Leo Reed? Nathan Reed? Detective Miller said, walking calmly through my open door. My sons froze, their arrogance evaporating into pure shock. You're both under arrest for the murder of Arthur Reed. The ensuing moments were a study in contrast. Leo exploded in a rage. Murder? Are you insane? This is ridiculous. She's a senile old woman who's lost her mind. You can't prove a thing. I want my lawyer. But Nathan? Nathan simply crumpled. He fell to his knees on the welcome mat, his body racked with sobs. I'm sorry, Mom. He wailed, his confession tumbling out between gasps. I'm so sorry. I told him it was a mistake. I told him not to do it. It was over. Right there in my hallway, it was all over. The legal process was swift. The lab confirmed that the white powder was a slow-acting, organ-destroying poison derived from a rare plant, almost impossible to trace without knowing what to look for. Traces of it were found in Arthur's exhumed remains. Faced with Nathan's full, detailed confession and the mountain of evidence Arthur and I had compiled, Leo's expensive lawyer advised him to take a plea deal. Both were sentenced to life in prison. Nathan, for his cooperation, would be eligible for parole in 25 years. Leo would not. Chloe filed for divorce before the ink on the sentencing was dry, deleted her social media accounts, and vanished. The months that followed were quiet. The house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene, tainted by the final, terrible memories. On my own terms, I sold it. I used the money, along with the substantial nest egg from Arthur's secret. Decades-long investments, the nest egg my sons had been too blind and arrogant to ever find, to give his life a new meaning. I established the Arthur Reed Foundation. Its mission wasn't to fight crime, but to champion what Arthur had always believed in, the quiet dignity of a well-run local business. The foundation provides grants and mentorship to entrepreneurs right here in Millfield. It's been a year now. I live in a small, bright condo that overlooks the town square. The heavy cloak of grief has finally lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose. This morning, I went to a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The Arthur Reed Foundation had just given its first major grant to a young couple who were reopening the old Millfield bakery. As I watched them hang their new sign, I felt Arthur's presence beside me, not as a ghost of a tragedy, but as a legacy of quiet, enduring goodness. My sons tried to define his death by their greed, but I made sure his life would be defined by his love for this community. And in doing so, I finally found my peace. What an incredible story of betrayal, but also of a quiet strength that is truly inspiring. Evelyn's journey is a powerful reminder that the truth has a way of coming to light, even in the darkest of times. I would love to hear your thoughts on this down in the comments. What lesson did you take away from Evelyn's story? If you've ever been in a situation where you had to find a strength you never knew you had, feel free to share your experience if you're comfortable doing so. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button. It really does help support the channel and allows me to continue bringing these dramatic and thoughtful stories to you. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. Thank you so much for spending your time here with me today. No matter what storms you may be facing, I hope this story is a small reminder that peace and purpose can be found on the other side of chaos. May you find your strength, and may your days be filled with hope.